we'll read this one too. It starts as 11:34. Again, the link will be in the description if you want to read this yourself. So I'm writing this from a hospital bed in Allentown, PA. A psychiatrist here has been coming in every few hours. She asked me to write down what I think happened. Well, I'll do you one better, Dr. Oberg. I'll tell you everyone exactly what happened. 2 days ago, I was pulled from the rubble of my home after being trapped for nearly 20 hours. But if you want to know what caused that to happen, we've got to go way back. To the 5th grade. To Mrs. Barshaki's math class. Sometimes she'd pass out these calculators. Huge, clunky things in hard leather cases. They were the size of a brick and seemed dated even in '96. I hated math. But calculators were a source of muted fascination, like some hefty, expensive thing we weren't allowed to play with at home. But then I figured out how to make them scandalous. They were much more fun. One day I'm sitting in class, bored. Mrs. Barshaki clomps over to the supply closet in her loud heels and lifts out the milk crate full of calculators. She places one on my desk, and I flip open the leather case. It's still facing away from me, but I start pushing buttons anyway. As the little upside-down LCD digits appear on the screen, I notice something. Some of them look like letters. What interesting things might I spell? I started with the usual curse words, of course. No luck. Probably half the class later, I figured out that if I typed in 1134, the little upside-down LCD digits spelled out hell. If you grew up in the 90s and also did this on your calculator, you're welcome. I started it. I'll admit I was a bit disappointed that I couldn't spell a real curse word on my calculator, but the hell trick was a hit with my classmates. Except Mara. Mara was weird. She didn't talk much. Her family was very religious, and Mara most certainly did not dress like the rest of us. She wore long, dark-colored skirts, thick, dark socks, clunky shoes, baggy sweaters, and perhaps worst of all, a Minnie Mouse watch. One day I was passing around my corrupted calculator, prompting giggles from my classmates and side-eye from Mrs. Barshaki. Then someone passed it to Mara. From behind I watched her head, thick, dark hair, look down at it. She kept it for a long time. I rolled my eyes. More giggles from friends. Then she spun around to face me. Her dour face and dark eyes held a mixture of judgment and something else, which I realized after a long, awkward moment was fear. She pressed the clear button and handed the calculator back to me. She stared. Its tiny display now showed a lame little 0. She had wiped my orthographic masterpiece from the face of the earth. That arrogant creep. That week I worked a little harder than usual to ensure she was ostracized. But then I felt bad. Not because I had started an uncouth nationwide calculator trend that was spreading like wildfire among the nation's 10-year-olds, or because I bullied Mara in the subtle way nice kids bully other kids. But because of the sinkhole. I grew up in the suburbs of Allentown. It's a cookie-cutter suburban landscape of developments that's immensely boring, save for one thing. Now and then the earth itself opens up and swallows whatever lies on its surface. Be it livestock, a home, a car, or an elementary school like mine. We were in math class and I'd gotten my calculator. It just uncovered its cute little solar panel, powered it up, and typed in those vile numbers again. 1, 1, 3, 4. And I'll never forget the sound. They say tornadoes sound like freight trains. And I've never been in a tornado, but I can tell you that a sinkhole opening up sounds just like a freight train. A deep rumble started quietly, almost imperceptible. I noticed the heavy wooden classroom door thudding lightly in its frame. Then the sound climbed up the classroom walls. It moved through the carpet below my feet, I felt it as much as I heard it. The classroom door now shook so violently that it sounded like it was being slammed over and over. It all built to a deafening crescendo. Then the building bent. The wall behind the chalkboard separated from the ceiling and revealed bright blue sky. The clock above the door rattled on the hook that held it in place, its fat, short hand pointing halfway between 11 and 12, and its long, skinny hand almost touching the 7, but not quite. 11:34. Mara spun around and stared. Then a huge cement wall fell towards her. I ducked under my desk and, well, I never did the calculator trick again. As a teenager in the 2000s or ever and had one of those LED clocks with the yellow numbers, I hated that clock, mostly because I often noticed that it read 11:34. There was a reasonable explanation for that. It's just what time in the morning this lazy teenager emerged from his bedroom on a summer weekend, shuffled downstairs, poured himself a huge bowl of Honey Nut Cheerios, and happened to glance at the oven clock. And then I'd remember. Mara never got to be a teenager. When I was up late, maybe gossiping with a friend on the phone, and would come downstairs for a glass of water, I'd never look at the clock on the stove. I already knew what time it was. I'd shut the lights off and run upstairs as if the number itself was going to grab me by my ankles and drag me screaming into a chasm under our house. Well, now I'm in my 30s. This glance at a clock and it says 11:34 thing has gone on in most of my life now, and I used to joke with myself that it's probably just what time I'll die. One day I'll step off a curb, look down at my phone like a jerk, notice it's 11:34, then promptly get hit by a crosstown bus. I was kind of at peace with it. And I didn't cause a sinkhole to open up anyway, right? My wife and I have been trying to buy a house for over 2 years, but houses were at premium and all seemed to be at the top of our budget. There was this one house, though, that came up all the time in our searches. Ugly. Cream-colored siding, dark on the inside, but it was huge, with a basement and a little backyard in a nice neighborhood. Despite being a bit close to the train tracks, it was almost half the price of every other house in the area. For 2 years, my wife said the listing must be a mistake or that there must be something seriously wrong with it. I'd nod and agree, but I agreed mostly because of the address. 11:34 Clayton Lane. Then we got desperate. It seemed like all the houses in the world would be gone and we'd be stuck running a tiny apartment forever. I called the listing agent and we went to see it. It was everything we ever wanted. Why had we waited so long? Our offer was accepted and I was ecstatic. We moved in 2 months later. My wife found a box of the previous owner's stuff in the basement. We called the agent, but the family never came to pick it up. I told her never to take it out again. The sounds started recently. A few days after we moved in, my wife said it was the freight train tracks nearby. Every night it got louder, and she'd sleep peacefully through it. I didn't, because I knew it wasn't a freight train. The other night, she slept quietly beside me, lightly snoring as she often does, but the clattering and banging was getting too loud. The noise was enveloping me. I stepped quietly from my bed and moved down the stairs. The walls began to shake. I opened the basement door and peered into the darkness, and it peered back. I pulled the chain on the light bulb over the stairs and swung back and forth wildly, because our whole house was now shaking wildly. I moved down and into the darkness, into the room where the furnace roared. The dark brown leather box left by the previous owner sat there, where I told my wife to leave it. I opened it. A heap of newspaper articles with bold headlines that blared words like tragedy and loss above pictures of the wreckage at my elementary school. I moved them aside. A portrait of a girl with dark eyes and a dour face stared back at me. Under it was a Minnie Mouse watch. Its second hand ticked. Its fat hour hand pointed halfway between 11 and 12, its minute hand nearly touching the 7. The last thing I remember was Minnie Mouse smiling at me as as the walls fell in.